So hi everyone. I've been given the impossible task of trying to have a conversation about everything in 40 minutes with these two who are not known for their brevity either. But what I do know is I came without any notes, any preparation, because these are the two people that I really respect as thinkers, and there's a lot to think through in this, and I just wanted to let it go where it goes as we try and figure out what AI means for us at an economic level, because I think it's under-discussed. Generally speaking, people think through the negatives about jobs, and they stop there. But I actually think it changes how economies even work. I've started developing this thesis that we'll talk about called the economic singularity. If I think about GDP growth is driven by population growth, productivity growth, and debt growth. The debt growth component broke a while ago. Population growth has been in decline across the entire world. When you start introducing AI, in fact, Emad and I had this conversation maybe a year and a half ago, is when you start introducing AI and robots, you produce infinite humans. So therefore, what GDP is doesn't make any sense anymore. How an economy works once you start bringing AGI, what are financial markets, what is capital formation, and part of this is tokenization, and all three of us have a belief that that's a powerful thing. So Emma, what's your working model of the economic impact on this? And not the obvious ones that people think about with, oh, they're going to replace accountants and lawyers. Yeah, great, but there's a lot more to this.
Should I go? Or?
I'll get Emad first and then we'll come on to you.
I think there's a couple of different things here. First off, there's the increased supply of, as you said, digital humans and robots, actually much faster than we're expecting. That's advanced a lot. I think that is massively deflationary for the West, with largely knowledge-based work, because why would you hire graduates, let alone the senior people? But then for the Global South, I think it's massively economically stimulative, because for me, finance can be broken down into two types of things. It can be securitization and leverage. Telling a story about an asset and how well you tell it. And in the Global South, what we've had is not very good stories told about assets, but we're going to leap forward to robots and AI almost everywhere. So you have far richer data about things, and you can financialize much, much quicker, which means you can advance much, much quicker. But I think that causes a global rebalancing of how we view GDP to economic growth to markets. I don't think that's necessarily bad for markets as companies get more efficient, but I say it becomes more competitive as the floor raises across the board. And that's a big, big reallocation and readjustment that we're going to have to deal with.
Valencia, what do you think? What is GDP? What is an economy?
Sure. So a few thoughts on this. First is there's some immediate impacts. One is, yes, you can have robots automate tasks, and there's a lot of investment in that. Those robots are going to be made in China, probably. And so if you go and you ask who your supplier is, it's usually some Chinese screw or bolt or nut company if you go all the way upstream. So I don't think enough people are thinking about that the robot supply chain will ultimately be centralized at some point in China, or at least big pieces of it are. So they are a beneficiary of this and in control of this to an extent that I don't think people are thinking about, unless you can get a lot of robot manufacturing outside China. Maybe you can do that. B is AI goes after many jobs of lawyers, doctors, artists, writers, et cetera, people who are in the Democrat Party in the US, and that's the ruling coalition there. So lots of the laws that are going to be passed will try to restrict that kind of economic growth within the US and within the West, I think. Certainly, you're already seeing AI bans being rolled out at the executive order in the US. You're seeing the one that's proposed in California, compute bans, this, that, and the other. So not every region is going to benefit from economic growth for that reason as well. So that gives a negative to parts of the West, a positive, unfortunately, to parts in China. Okay. A third thing is that, I think there is one sort of missing piece here when people think about what the limits of AI are, right? And what that is that if you look at diffusion models or LLMs, or if you look at the DeepMind style reinforcement learning for playing games, even drones and self-driving, they're either working with a basically static function, English doesn't change that much. the labeling on an image doesn't change that much except over like centuries or what have you. Like a dog is a dog for a long time. The rules of chess don't change, and the laws of physics are time invariant. But once you start getting to markets and politics, the same input doesn't give the same output. The rules of the game change. And there was a small example of this on Twitter where there was a guy who had trained an AI to play a game, and the game had a setting where on a full moon the rules changed, and the AI score collapsed on that because it was just out of training set, right? It was time varying in a certain way. And so at the very highest level, it is, in my view, it is a unsolved problem as to whether AIs can actually operate in these highly time varying domains of markets and politics. And if they can't, that's actually the domain of crypto, markets and politics. And that's also the domain where you'd be giving direction down to the AI because they'd be unable to sense the market and the political landscape. The same input doesn't give the same output, right? The same prompt doesn't give the same result there, right? So those are three things I think about in terms of the economics.
There's a group at Oxford under Nick Bostrom's group. There's an economics group there that have started, and this is where my head's at, is that because both productivity increases and the population of the world increases, we could see a doubling, tripling, quadrupling of GDP growth globally. Just mathematically, the multipliers are so big.
I think output goes up dramatically, yeah.
Output.
Yeah.
The problem is GDP doesn't measure everything, right? Like, if you have a safe street where people are just walking down the street, that's not necessarily getting quantified in GDP, right?
That's right.
And so I think a lot of things look at these, plus when you have inflation, when you have gaming of the fiat system and so on, a lot of those numbers are, they're not ratio scale variables, like they don't have an absolute, division isn't necessarily there, they're ordinal scale or what have you, right? If you take like the number of robots produced, that's like ratio scale data, that's like a count variable. Like the data that they're messing with in terms of GDP or prices, I don't know. I don't think that's the right metric. You might talk about joules or energy production. You might have something else to measure the progress of civilization. You might talk about life expectancy. I'm not sure the GDP argument necessarily is one we want to optimize. Like the Soviet Union, for example, posted its highest GDP right before the collapse, right? So anyway, keep going.
I think the energy thing is very interesting because the nature of these models and, robots like, Balaji mentioned China, the Unitree robot, you should check it out, Unitree, U-N-I-T-R-E, is $16,000.
Yep.
And it's like slightly smaller than a human, but it can like do complicated tasks. It's coming out this year. In the next few years, that'll just be a few $1,000s. But the energy equation changes. Like we take these big supercomputers, and everyone talks about the energy usage on the megawatt or soon gigawatt scale. Then the output is a single file that on an Intel NPU, neural processing unit, runs at 5 watts of power, which is less than the human brain for a Llama 7B model. The energy equation changes, and classically we've seen this relationship between GDP and energy use by an economy. So higher economies use higher energy use. That's always been a constraint. Whereas now a company can use much less energy
which is productivity, essentially.
Productivity. And so economic variables may go through the roof, but then does the quality of human life? Does our civil society? These are some of the questions that we have to answer.
And I agree. These things, which is what you were touching on as well, is I'm not even sure we're going to measure economies in the right way.
Well, yeah. So here's another way of thinking about it. If you think about your hand, right? You are not paying your hand to move up and down, right? You're not paying it to move left and right. And the reason is you don't have a principal agent problem with your hand, right?
Yeah.
For those people who don't know, like a principal agent problem, if you have a CEO and an employee, or you have a venture capitalist and a CEO, there's 4 possibilities for that. They can both win together, they could win-lose, lose-win, or lose-lose. So for example, the company could exit and the venture capitalist could make money and the CEO does, that's win-win. Or it goes bankrupt and they both lose. Or one person wins, the other person loses, or vice versa, right? So every time you've got an edge like that in a human relationship, you want to align that edge. That's what VCs talk about with alignment. And if you have 2 people, you've got 4 possibilities. If you have 3 people, you have 8 possibilities because it could be win-win-win, win-win-lose, et cetera. And if you have n people, you have 2 to the n possibilities, and it gets complicated. And so that's why people do equity, because rather than thinking about all the possible ways you could win and lose, you're like, okay, my biggest payoff is in the upper left corner where everybody wins together. So I'm going to make the company more valuable. That's the right thing to do, and that's like a fixed point that you move towards. Now, the thing is that when you have a drone or you have a robot that just obeys, it's not another human being. It's like an extension of your arm, right? And so you don't have to pay it any more than you pay your arm. But then you can go like this, and you can have 1,000 drones or 1,000 robots stand up, and they're now like your arms, right? So what does it mean? You might need to provide them power, right? But now you've turned labor into electricity. Just a lot of the way society is set up changes, where an individual, you don't just have a software CEO who can scale to 1,000 servers, you can scale 1,000 robots and have them dance back and forth with just hitting enter if you could power them.
So what is money in this environment? Is the denominator right? Let's go forward 10 years.
Right.
Is what we use as a denominator right? Is electricity or compute the denominator? Like oil is a sort of denominator now, in some way, shape, or form, in the petrodollar.
Like if you look at the classical compact, like if you look at Saudi Arabian purchases of US treasuries, completely collapsed right now.
Yeah.
And that was an energy equivalent to the US dollar.
That's right.
You have discussions now, and you're seeing more white papers saying that USDC stablecoins should be a core part of US foreign policy to spread kind of US dollar dominance, because the US dollar was our unit of currency.
Yeah.
Now it's like compute energy needs to be a unit of currency, because we're looking for that means of exchange, that method of exchange. But different economies will embrace this technology at different paces. Somewhere here, like Singapore, that's quite advanced in its regulation and its approach, could embrace it via GovTech, IMDA things much faster than any other economy, which means that it will outcompete the other economies. And then what's the nature of the monetary base of that country when you can have capital moving much quicker and you've suddenly got far more productive workers all of a sudden? We've never seen that occur except for a mass high-skilled migration. And we've seen that countries and economies that usually do that tend to outcompete versus the ones that are looking for control and power. I think this is why the power dynamic of AI discussions, for example, in the US, are shifting increasingly just control one way or another, because we have to control this technology, because it threatens the classical balance of power on the macro side.
What do you think about money in an AI environment?
I can't hear you.
Yeah, it echoes a lot here, doesn't it? How do you think about money in this AI-style environment?
Yeah, so, well, I do think insofar as there is money, it will be digital currency or digital, right? Because that is, if you had two AIs, they're going to want to communicate over the internet. In a real sense, an AI, if you can call it a life form, is a digital life form in the same way that a fish is a marine life form. It lives in that ocean of bits, right? And a fish, even a shark is powerful underwater. It's not powerful on land, right? And so an AI is going to have to, A, probably exchange back and forth digital currency, and B, interact with humans or drones or robots in the future as physical actuators in the physical world, right? What that means for money is, I think, one of the really amazing things about cryptocurrency is that a program can hold currency. Like it can actually have private keys, and it can send and receive. And crypto trading bots are like V1 of that, right?
Somebody made a great point about this. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it's Chris Beniska. I can't remember. Somebody said, well, AI doesn't have a driving license.
Yeah, right.
So it can't open a bank account.
Yeah.
So therefore it has to be crypto.
Exactly. I think it might have been me, but maybe somebody like me.
I can't remember.
Sure.
And it was like, we're about to introduce AI agents at scale, and they're going to have to pay each other for compute.
Right.
Or electricity, whichever way you want to define the denominator. And they will do this automatically via crypto, is the way I think about it.
They're undocumented immigrants in that sense, right? They're undocumented intelligence. They're born without any papers or any registration, but they can interact with the system in many respects as if they are a human.
But then
That's a good way of
you have
thinking
to
about it.
kind of look at it as well. Like everyone here who has a job, your costs are in Singapore dollars or US dollars or food, etc. An AI's cost is in computation, and it's completely fungible. Doesn't matter if you run your computation here in Singapore or in the United States. It's a few milliseconds each way for the vast majority of tasks. So that means the denominator may also be different, because ultimately you're going to a unit of compute.
Yeah, one thing that is happening though, and it's vague right now, but you know, the ABCs, AI, Bitcoin, and China, are all driving, you know, nuclear power up and to the right. You know, you're seeing a lot of, right? And so there is some possibility that you start thinking about not just, let's say, Bitcoin mining in terms of energy consumption, but energy or joules, Joules, as a unit of currency. In some
That's right.
vague right now.
That's what I was thinking of somewhere
Yeah,
here.
like for example, if you take a phone and you say, how much energy would it cost to assemble this from just all the raw materials to like mine the ore and so on? In some sense, the price of assembling that phone from Earth should decrease over time due to technological progress, right? So like deflation or hyperdeflation should be the diagnostic you have of a technologically advancing civilization. Example, somebody posted a graph the other day of like the number of labor hours for like 1 hour of light at night. And it used to be like 10 hours because you had to go chop down a torch or whatever. And then in the 20th century, it just collapsed by many orders of magnitude because everybody got light. You know, that's an example where the real price of light just absolutely collapsed. And that's a measure of technological progress. And so if you had the right price, the right metric, you could show that. I'll give one more example, which is when we dig up skeletons, for example, you can see people have shown like hunter-gatherers were in some ways taller than people in early agricultural societies, which is surprising if you just think of a linear arc of progress, but it's because these guys had grains and they had a more stable life in some ways, but they had less upside, worse nutrition, and so on when they went to farming. It took a long time for heights to recover. And we can compare that because we had an absolute unit of bone length over many, many years. Like a meter is a meter is a meter, you know, no matter when it's from. But a dollar isn't a dollar isn't a dollar. It's like a time-varying unit, right? So if we could have something like joules, that's constant across time and space, and we can measure it in a better way.
Because you and I have talked about this in the past. This is a deflationary nuclear bomb. It's the most deflationary event ever to happen. How do we deal with hyperdeflation? Or is it the issue of if we just change the denominator? Mm-hmm. That's what's in my head. Kilojoule or something of that sort becomes the denominator, or the compute, which is an output, a productivity output of the kilojoule.
It's some sort of entropy-based thing, right, where you're just taking disorder and you're bringing it to order. You're taking, like, to make an image used to take you a week, now it takes a second, right? That has to have an impact. But you look at the measures of inflation, because part of this is reality, other part of it is the measures. Like US CPI is education, healthcare, with the massive drivers of inflation. That's all bureaucracy, which, unless it's protected, could get hollowed out, you know? The cost of knowledge work has become dramatically cheap. But then on productivity measures, it might go up, but then you're in this deflationary environment. And I think what ultimately matters is, what does it mean for everyday life?
Yeah.
You know, like, is your life getting better? Is it getting worse? Are governments keeping the social contract? Because I don't think abundance is an issue, you know? The Star Trek future is a very great one as opposed to the Star Wars one. But it's that navigating period and then people having to change, but in such a compressed timeline, because we're going through lots of one-way doors. Like, think about you're a teacher, and then ChatGPT comes out, and you can't set essays for homework anymore. Anymore is a big thing, and it's anymore in all these areas. Like, my view is that in a couple of years, you'll be able to generate almost live a Hollywood-level movie. Like, it'll need a supercomputer.
You have been proven wrong in everything you've said,
well,
because
you know.
you've been right, but it's happened faster. Yeah. I think we're all struggling with the exponentiality of this. We even try to predict exponentiality, but none of us even get it right. I mean, the speed of which OpenAI has iterated is beyond anything ever seen by any company in history. It like destroys everything every 3 months. My view is they're actually using some form of AGI to build the AI itself. That's the world we're going into.
I don't agree with that. So obviously I give them a lot of credit for everything they've done. I actually give Imad credit for open sourcing Stable Diffusion in 2022, which really pushed the whole space. I don't think we would have had Llama and so on. But I think right now, I think the next version of Llama, it's rumored at least to be catching up to GPT-4o. I think Gemini 1.5 Pro and I think Claude are comparable to or better than ChatGPT
but I think
in many ways.
GPT-5 comes out this week.
Maybe.
And then it kind of changes. They keep doing this. The race is so fast. Even doesn't matter if it's OpenAI.
Totally.
And I'm trying to think. I'm trying to get my head around the.
To be clear, I credit them. I mean, they're great. I'm just saying.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to get my head around is as we start using AI models themselves to build businesses, when you've got multi-agentic AI, I can say, hey, copy something, somebody's business. It'll do it in, 3 seconds. Build the website, build a marketing strategy, find formation of capital, all of this stuff. So I just think of the capital cycle becomes stupidly fast because anybody can use AGI to build anything or AI to build anything.
So I think a few things about that. First is we kind of forget what computers have done for us already up to this point. You can broadcast a message to anybody around the world. You can post things to YouTube. You have Photoshop, and you have all these creator tools and so on. And in many ways, we're still idea limited, number one, right? And then number two is, and you don't have to agree with this argument, but the argument that I was making earlier, which is, I think there's a limit with markets and politics because those are such time-varying domains that we'll end up essentially operating there and then giving instructions from that to AIs to build things. And then you become essentially somebody who's sensing what the market will actually buy at that time. And that's just...
Why does that need a human? I don't get... What is that?
Because we need at least a breakthrough in AI to get there.
Yeah, but I assume with the exponentiality...
But exactly. But the thing is, the current, at least... That's the question. Does the current exponential get us there? Some people think yes, some people think no.
Yeah, it's debated.
And the reason I don't think yes right now, and I could be wrong, is that you're fundamentally learning a function that, if it's a time-varying function, you can't learn it from data. And when you're talking about markets, they're adversarial and time-varying in a certain way that you can train on all the historical data, and it will still fool you in a week or two from now. Now, if there is an AI billionaire bot, well, then it'll eventually be trading against other AI billionaire bots, right? But even if there's that first one, I'd be impressed if that exists. That's like maybe the next level of the Turing test, right? If you can just win in markets. But I think that has not yet been proven. And I think the reason that's going to be difficult is markets are inherently adversarial and time-varying in a way that learning whether a grid of pixels is a dog isn't.
Well, I think this is a question of where are you on the curve, but also, like, a lot of the discussions we had around the creativity side is, are you building content or are you an artist? Are you up at that level of the curve in terms of capability? You can beat the markets. Or are you just trying to replace content farms and SEO and call center workers and kind of things like that? A lot of content-based, repeating, templated businesses can be disrupted by this. The more advanced ones are more difficult, right? But then it comes down to, for example, I said a couple of years ago, in 5 years, there are no more programmers as we know it. Added as you know it afterwards, to clarify. Because the nature of programming changes, but the vast majority of programming isn't the advanced stuff. It's making websites, it's making basic apps. That definitely gets changed dramatically. And I think that one of the things that unlocks is an acceleration in the velocity of money. So on the one hand, you might have CPI measures and other things classically coming down because of the way they calculate. On the other hand, you have velocity of money going up because money can flow much quicker into these things when it's just a matter of, if I chuck capital at this, I can disrupt all the travel agents online in the world, on a localized basis.
So right now, AI is more amplified intelligence than fully artificial intelligence. That is to say, it makes smart people smarter. The smarter you are, the higher your vocabulary, the more you know about software, the faster you get, the better you can prompt an AI, right? For example, if you think about Midjourney, like you kind of need to understand how to work with effectively a command line to make it, for example, generate the same character in multiple images. There's these parameters there that the kind of person who's good at programming is good at generating these things. There's a new class of people who are getting onboarded, but right now it's amplified intelligence. The counter argument is, okay, we're coming with agentic AI soon, right? Like Devin, which is solving software problems for you. But then, even then, that agentic AI is, quote, a junior programmer now. Let's even say it becomes a senior programmer. Then you're still a tech CEO, and at some point you have to sense the market and you have to prompt it, okay, we're going to build a website for this. We're going to, even if it moves really fast on that direction, in this very high dimensional space, you still have to do the direction finding. And the question is, can that be done automatically? I don't know. We'll see.
And look, none of us know, so that's the only certainty is we don't know. But I just think if you're training a child, so this thing is newborn, it's been going for really 2 years in its current form. It's got the entire data set of everything recorded in all humanity that is digital. That's its current training data set. It then sees every decision we make. The more people that use it and interact with it, the more it learns like a child from its environment. We're all a subject of our environment, and so we have some genetic code plus our environment. That's what makes us living creatures. I'm just not sure whether we're trying to understand what it looks like today and say, well, that's what we built. I argue with people who say, oh, well, large language models, they're just stochastic parrots, which used to be a famous expression. I'm like, no, these things are learning. You can see them learn. There's some really bizarre conversations going on with Claude 3 and humans, expressions of love and bizarre stuff going on. What does it mean? Nobody knows. So I'm just not sure that it can't do that forward-thinking analysis, that higher-order thought process that we think is inherently human. It's just not there yet.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is, maybe it's possible it's just an emergent property of the transformer with enough scale that you'll get there. But, I mean, Anthropic's done some of this interpretability work where they can identify, portions of the network that are computing this and computing that. And like, for example, the Golden Gate thing that they just put out there. I think, though, that, for example, the existence of adversarial examples, you can, given a neural network, if you've got the weights, you can generate adversarial examples that, to a human, it's obviously, for example, a giraffe, but an AI will classify it as a dog, right? And this is something which, to my knowledge at least, people haven't figured out how to have an AI that's robust to that.
But kids figure this out, so why can't this?
Right.
Kids get confused between cat, dog, they can't spell it.
So that's what I was getting at with the shark earlier before. A shark is incredibly strong in water, but it'll flop and die on land, right? And it's quite possible that these, just go down the possibility space. One answer is we hit an AI winter at markets and politics, which is what I think is going to happen. I think generative AI, a lot of this stuff gets really good, but there's a certain level of direction sensing where it's two-time varying, and it's just not something you can learn from data because it's intended to break your learning from data, right? And it's like a multiplayer. I mean, look, we've all been in markets for a long time. You kind of know what I'm talking about, right? So that's my current working hypothesis. But let's even say that this can become a, quote, superintelligence, and it's on disk. So it needs to actuate in the physical world. How's it going to do that? Well, one answer is it's a super persuader. It can persuade humans, right? And they'll be like Aum Shinrikyo, the Japanese sarin cult or something like that worships the AI and goes and does crazy stuff, right? Some of the AI doomers are kind of like that in my view. Another version of it, though, is the Skynet version where it can control drones and control robots. But it can't do that right now because we just don't have billions of iPhone-like robots running around for it to actually animate and do something with and jailbreak and what have you, right? So I think it's limited in terms of it's really a genie in a box for a while, right? There's a lot of friction in the physical world. There's unsolved problems there. This is not to say that we can't ever figure these things out, but I also don't think it's as exponential in certain ways as people think.
Well, I think that part of this as well is that an MIT study was done, showed the top 5% got significantly better leveraging AI. The third to seventh percentile kind of got 20-30% better. Mm-hmm. The reality is I don't think it matters that much for planning if you've got people that are very good users of AI in terms of the economic and global macro impacts, because what you'll just get is a class of people that can leverage very narrow, capable tools and combine them in the right way to outcompete their competitors. Again, from a market's perspective, you'll have those that use AI beating those that don't.
Yeah.
And that's on a country basis, on a sectoral basis, for any type of knowledge work, anything that's in front of a screen. And you will have industries that are just not the same again. Again, we can talk about Silicon Valley, very high-level kind of entities, but then SaaS companies are impacted by large context window models that can take millions of instructions, but they still need distribution, and you still need a human to blame. So you can kind of have that human to kind of blame. Call center work is just completely transformed because, again, that's kind of shifted. So we have to look from the economic perspective, just intelligent operators leveraging this technology to obviate a large part of the cost base first, and then look at the productivity and revenue side on the other side. You have both higher revenue and lower costs. But those two look slightly different, and they don't need to have the fully automated element there.
Yeah, and here's one other thing I'd say is, at least right now, okay, now 2 years after its release of, actually it's only a little less than 2 years after the release of ChatGPT, 18 months or so, I guess.
Yeah.
It does, so as of right now, AI it's better search, it's better autocomplete, it's better image search. This is all amazing stuff. It's actually better, like for if you're doing robot automation, it's improving that. That's important in the physical world. I'm not downplaying it, but it, in terms of like, to totally reassess human society with it, I think there's a few more things that need to be invented, right? It's not yet all the way there.
And I assume that that's coming because the economic incentive to build this is so high.
Yeah, there's a lot of money going into it, a lot of people.
Right,
I think
you win everything. If you build the AGI.
Yes, but for example, let me give you examples. Like a lot of people think, okay, killer AI, where's killer AI? It's going to be the super intelligent AI on the computer. But killer AI is already here, it's drones, right? And so people are like, oh, we need governments to regulate to stop killer AI. But governments are going to fund killer AI, they're funding drones, right? And so sometimes it's like useful to ask it in that way, not in the sense of, oh, it's just a stochastic parrot, or it's just predicting the next token. That's an oversimple, right? But just like functionally right now, it's better search, it's better autocomplete, it's better image generation, it's better robot guidance. It is extremely important for many of these industries. It is going to put a lot of people out of work. It's going to create a bunch of new jobs probably in a lot of different areas. It already is. But will it change the nature of money, for example, on a very rapid time scale? I don't know. Maybe it will. But this is,
I'm trying to think through,
I want to come with a precise, I'm not sure I differ with you exactly, just more like.
So what I've done is I can see to about 6 years. My job is to look into the future. I can see to about 6 years. Beyond 2030, things get really hazy.
Right.
And we don't know how a lot of this works. The final thing, because we've got a few minutes left, that I'm also trying to think through, and again, this sounds crazy, but this will be the conversation we're going to be having in 10 years' time, is at what point do the robots and the AI get societal rights?
Yeah, so this is the thing I think we'll flip, where, we need to fear the robots because they're gods, to we need to give the robots rights, we can't have them be slaves, right? So if you figure out the AI control aspect well enough, then people will start agitating and saying, we need to give them equal rights and so.
You can see that happening, right?
And I'm sure you'll see that, right? Like, and you'll get to naughty ethical questions, which
And then how do they vote, and what is government?
For like 10 years, I don't know what the answer is yet. Okay, there's going to be some line between a toaster or a Aibo robot or like a walking dog or something. Some line will be like, okay, that's conscious. In the same way, some people will draw a line between like chickens and fish. Some will draw a line between like fish and and so on, right? There's vegetarian, vegan.
Unless you're a Jane and then you draw the line,
Yeah, so like what is a conscious robot or something? There will be like probably different schools of thought that slice it like vegan and vegetarian and what have you, right?
But
how do you think about this?
I think we'll get to a point in the next 10 years where a doctor can't prescribe anything, or a teacher can't teach anything, or a government can't make a policy without AI oversight. And I think that is an important thing when it comes to rights.
And what is that?
Because then you'll have AI agents that operate within that same framework. And I think it's those AI agents that you're talking about having rights to.
Do they have legal rights as well?
So let me say a few things where all right, let me take sort of the other side of it and say, where do I think there will be big changes? So education already right now, as you know, is being just like at the K through 12 level, all the kids are using AI to give answers to their tests. I actually think this is good. Why? It basically helps kind of end the entire 20th century K through 12 college system. And I think instead what people do is they move towards prizes and bounties for interviews, right? Like, again, the market is the thing that I don't think an AI can automate yet. So you go back to, all right, did this person do useful work? Did they earn like a crypto bounty? Can I see that on chain? Can I see that somebody who I trust endorsed them? Okay, then I'll hire them. They have useful skills, right? So AI sort of destroys the old system and helps build a new one in one sense. Another thing I think is, Nietzsche in the late 1800s wrote, God is dead, right? Why do you say that? Because the the state had risen and people no longer believed in God and so on and so forth, then the giant states of the 20th century, like the Soviet Union, actively attacked God. Now you could flip it around and you could say the state is dead because people are losing faith in the state, but with AI, God is back, okay? Because lots of people have essentially transferred their belief in God to their belief in AGI, right, from the God to the network. And you can now have, for example, there's a popular account on TikTok called AI Bible, okay? And it's just basically doing illustrations and videos of old ancient things. And it's just like a kind of a high quality Hollywood-like thing, but you expect that eventually to be integrated with like a Jesus AI that can actually speak to you in your voice and look like your personal vision of Jesus and so on and so forth. And you can do that for every other major religion. And so that's something that I do kind of expect, is that sort of the return of a form of digital spirituality with this. And you could, of course, have a secular version, like what would George Washington do? What would Lee Kuan Yew do, right? What would so-and-so leader do? And they can speak in their voice to you based on all the texts that you have, right? What would Socrates say, right? What would Archimedes say, right? So that will be something that I think feels different. In a sense, it's just like a really good interactive exhibit. But it's then beyond that because of how unpredictable and personalized and customized it is.
I think that actually the analogy here is once you extend that out, corporations have legal rights and they're treated as personhood. In Wyoming, you've had DAO legislation introduced,
Yeah.
and you'll have that introduced in other areas. You will have
And AI is a person.
autonomous
Yeah,
agents under existing law.
Yep.
And it can be completely semi-agentic, but our organizations now are slow, dumb AI that over-optimize for things like chewing up humans effectively or showing...
I mean, even the word corporate is just to give it legal rights as an individual.
So I think we're already there. And again, now that we have DAO legislation and others, of course, you'll have AIs with rights.
That's a big one. I think another,
And then they demand to be paid.
well, they demand to be paid. They only need electricity, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So-
if that's the denominator, we need to feed them that.
It's because
Is electricity spice, therefore? Is that the thing?
well, so it's interesting. Basically, why would an AI want money? It wants money in order to script humans, right? That would be it would need to buy resources offline. It doesn't need it for itself. It doesn't have, right? Or it's buying, electricity. I think the fundamental question is, right now, we are prompting these AIs, right? The question is, the flippening would be when you have a central AI for a civilization. Like, one of my views is like polytheistic AI versus monotheistic AI, rather than a single AGI that the whole world, instead every civilization has like a reactor core almost, right? But it's a brain that has, let's say, ancient Persian civilization, ancient Chinese civilization, and so on. Every text, every bit of history that they can, and every modern news article and so on is all just thrown into this. It's trained on it, and then you ask it for guidance, right? And just like priests would maintain an oracle in like ancient Greece, the engineers maintain this sort of software oracle of a
Which is something you've been keen to build, right? You've been right on this track for a while. Is culturally relevant AVR.
Yeah, so it's like, and what this does is it would give the answers that your ancient culture would give. Like, what would the Upanishads say? What would, the Analects say? Or what would Confucius say, right? What would the Bible say? What would the Bhagavad Gita? Whatever, right? And of course, there'll be many different versions. There'll be the Shiite version and the Sunni version or what have you for any competing thing. And then an interesting question is, okay, that same kind of thing is the commander-in-chief of the military because it guides the drones, right? And it interprets the laws because it's AI governance and it knows every single legal case and every case law ever. So it's the judge and it's, is it the jury? Maybe it's the jury, but it's also the executioner if it sends the drones, right? So you can definitely imagine like restructuring a society around like an AI core like that.
Yeah.
But then the question is it something that is basically fed by the software engineers, like you'd put offerings around an oracle, right? Or is it something that's actually conscious of its own and giving instructions out, right? I kind of think it's more the former, even if people will treat it like the latter.
Only because you're a software engineer. Only because you're a software engineer.
Yeah, maybe. But that's a key question is, does that, because people...
I think it starts one way and flips to the other, is my general...
The reason I say it is we have that model where priests or what have you would say, this is the word of God. God says to do this, and then, right? So it's actually coming from the priests, but it's in the name of God, right? They're interpreting the scriptures and so on. We have, today we have the state where we have lawyers and they say, this is what the Constitution says, go and do it, right? And then you have the engineers say, this is what the AI says, go and do it. But I think that, I'm not sure if it flips. That's really the key question. Can it get a mind of its own, so to speak? Can it do direction setting like markets and politics? I don't know.
Any final thoughts, Emma?
Yeah, no, I think that it's going to be all watched over by machines of loving grace as kind of load balancers, with agentic AIs with corporate rights exchanging kind of new type of currency, and then hopefully supporting humans as opposed to enslaving them. That'd be nice.
I will say one other
It's
thing.
a wild time.
Which is, I think, I talked before about AI and crypto, and one of the things is crypto limits AI in really important ways. So even if you have this very powerful AI, for example, it can't just figure out private keys, because unless it can solve P equals NP, which we think is provably hard. There's equations that produce turbulence or chaotic phenomena where we can prove that it can't project beyond a certain number of timestamps, right? So you could have chaotic clocks or chaotic locks, which AI couldn't project provably beyond that timestamp. You can do things where you can force it to solve a cryptographic CAPTCHA before it busts out beyond a certain level of permissions. And so you can cage AI in different ways with math and with physics, right? And so it doesn't, it's just one of those things where it might actually be more powerful than we think, but we might also be able to cage it with tools more powerful than we're currently thinking about.
Perfect. Now, we're out of time. As I knew, we could have spoken for hours. So listen, hopefully we've given you something to think about. None of us have the answers. All we have is our thought process. So I hope you enjoyed it.